The prisoner in the cage, the alien transport ship, floated in the black silence of space, its massive shape glowing faintly against the distant stars. Inside, the air smelled of metal, sweat, and fear. The sound of the engines was like a constant growl, deep and steady, echoing through every narrow hallway. In the center of the cargo bay were rows of cages. Some were large, holding groups of captives. Others were small, built for a single prisoner. Cold blue lights hung above, making the shadows look even darker. In one of the smallest cages sat a young alien girl. Her hair was tangled and fell over her face. Her clothes were nothing more than torn fabric, barely covering her thin body. Around her neck was a thick metal collar with small blinking lights. Every few minutes, it gave a faint electric hum, a reminder that any wrong move would bring pain. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She didn't cry, not anymore. The guards passed her cage without care. Two tall, insect-like aliens laughed as they walked by. One tapped the metal bars with his claw and said in his harsh voice, "This one is broken, worth nothing." The other shrugged, "We'll sell her for scraps. Maybe the market will take her for parts." They laughed again and moved on. From the far corner of the bay, a man watched. He wore the uniform of the crew, but his steps were quiet. His eyes sharp. This man was human, the only one on the ship. He kept his head down, acting like a simple worker, but his mind was always moving. He was not here by accident. He had a reason. The girl noticed him, her eyes faintly glowing in. The blue light followed him as he walked past. She didn't speak at first, but when he came close to check the cage locks, she whispered something. Her voice was dry and weak. "Please. Make it stop." The man paused, looking at her more closely. Her skin had marks where the collar had shocked her. Her wrists were bruised from the chains. There was no begging for food, no asking for water. Only a plea to end the pain. He felt something heavy settle in his chest. He leaned closer, pretending to examine the cage, and spoke so softly the guards couldn't hear. "I can't do it now, but soon." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not in mistrust, but in quiet hope. The guards called out for him to hurry. He nodded, without turning, and walked away. But in his mind, a plan was already forming. He knew the ship's route. He knew where the controls were. And now he knew who he was saving first. That night's cycle, when most of the crew rested, he returned to the bay. He pretended to check the temperature systems, but his real goal was to see her again. She was awake, sitting in the same position. But her head lifted when he came near. He pulled a small object from his pocket. It was an old canteen. Dented and scratched, filled with water, he slid it through the bars. She took it quickly, almost afraid someone would take it away. The first sip made her cough, but she kept drinking until it was gone. When she finished, she looked up at him. For the first time, her lips curved into the smallest smile. He felt the weight of the moment. That smile was a promise. She believed in him now. And that meant he couldn't fail. Later, in the dim corridors, he overheard two guards talking in the mess hall. They spoke about the flesh market where the slaves would be sold. The girl's name was mentioned. A short, soft word that sounded almost human. The guards laughed about how no one would pay for her. "She's too quiet, too damaged," one said. The human's hands tightened into fists. He returned to his sleeping pod, lying still in the darkness. The engines hummed, the ship shook gently. But his mind was sharp. He had to move soon. Once they reached the market, it would be too late. The image of her in that cage stayed with him, the way her eyes had searched his. The way she drank the water like it was life itself. "Tomorrow," he told himself, "tomorrow I start." And deep in the cargo bay, the girl sat in the cold light, still trapped, still silent, but now waiting. The human woke before the ship's lights brightened for the day cycle. The air in his small crew room was stale and cold. He sat on the narrow bunk, staring at the floor. Every sound of the ship, the hum of the engines, the soft clank of metal reminded him that time was running out. He had one chance, one window before the alien transport reached the market world. Once they landed, the girl in the cage would vanish into the hands of buyers. And he would never see her again. He dressed in the same gray uniform as the rest of the crew. Blending in, he walked the long hallway toward the cargo bay. Keeping his eyes low, the insect-like guards barely noticed him. They thought of him as just another hired worker from some backwater world. That was his advantage inside the cargo bay. The smell of fear still hung heavy. The cages rattled as some captives shifted in their sleep. Others stared blankly, already without hope, but her eyes, the girl's eyes, found him again the moment he entered. He didn't speak to her, not yet. Instead, he moved from cage to cage. Pretending to inspect the locks, his real purpose was to study the placement of security panels and the patrol patterns of the guards. Each movement, each step, was stored. In his mind, two guards leaned against a wall, talking in low voices. He moved closer. Pretending to check a temperature gauge, their words reached him. "They'll pay well for the fighters," one said, "but that small one. Maybe we can throw her in for free." They both laughed. The human kept his face blank. But inside, a fire burned. When the guards left, he finally approached her cage. This time, he knelt. Bringing his voice down to a whisper, "Listen to me," he said. "Tomorrow night, when I tap the bars twice, be ready." Her brow furrowed. "Ready for what?" "For freedom," he replied. His tone was calm, but his eyes told her he meant it. She didn't ask questions, just nodded once. The collar around her neck blinked with a slow, cruel rhythm, reminding them both of the risk. Later, during the midday break, the human sat alone in the mess hall. A tray of untouched food in front of him. Around him, the alien crew laughed, argued, and boasted about past raids. He ignored them, his mind building the steps of his plan. Step 1. Disable the main security network from the control room near engineering. Step 2. Open the cages silently without triggering alarms. Step 3. Lock the guards away before they could reach the bridge. Step 4. Take the ship. It was simple on paper, but in reality, one mistake would get them all killed. After the meal, he took a detour to the maintenance deck. This was where the air vents, power lines, and control wires ran through narrow tunnels. He had memorized this place weeks ago. But now he traced the route again, making sure he could reach the security hub fast. As he crouched by a humming wall of cables, a noise made him freeze, heavy. Footsteps approached, a guard's shadow stretched along the wall. "What are you doing down here?" The guard demanded. The human pointed to a panel. "Cooling units overheating." He lied smoothly. The guard grunted, uninterested, and walked away. The human let out a slow breath. Before leaving the maintenance deck, he slipped a small metal shard into his pocket, sharp enough to work a lock, small enough to hide in a fist. This would be for her. He couldn't risk being the only one with tools. That evening, the cargo bay was quieter. The captives sat in silence, saving what little energy they had. He walked past her cage again, careful to keep his movements casual. As he bent down to check the bars, he slid the shard through the gap. She caught it quickly, hiding it under her sleeve. "When I tap twice," he whispered again. "Use that." Her fingers tightened around it. She didn't smile this time, but her gaze was steady, stronger than before. The night cycle began. The crew retired to their sleeping pods. Only a few guards remained on rotation. The human lay on his bunk, staring at the dim ceiling. The hum of the engines felt louder than usual. His heartbeat matched the rhythm, steady but heavy. He thought about the risk, not just to himself, but to her, and to every other soul locked in those cages. But the image of her whispering pleas Make it stop came back to him, and the doubt disappeared. Tomorrow, he told himself, tomorrow, everything changes. The human moved through the transport ship's narrow corridors with the same careful steps as always. But tonight, every sound felt sharper. Every flicker of the lights seemed to last too long. Every shadow looked deeper. The air carried the faint smell of oil and burnt metal from the engine core. He had been to the maintenance shafts many times before, but this time, each turn and ladder felt different, like the ship itself knew what he was planning. The shafts were hot and cramped, metal walls pressing in from all sides. The hum of power cables vibrated against his hands as he crawled forward. In his pocket was the stolen shock baton, a guard's weapon he had taken 2 days ago and hidden inside a loose panel. Now it was fully charged and ready. Next to it was the security override chip, small but powerful enough to shut down the ship's entire lock system for a few minutes. The glow from the power conduits lit his face in blue. He paused once to listen. Far above, he heard the heavy steps of a guard on patrol. The alien's claws scratched against the floor plates. The sound faded, and the human kept moving. He reached a section of the shaft where the metal felt warm to the touch. Steam hissed from a narrow vent. The temperature here could burn skin if he stayed too long. But it was the fastest path to the security hub. He pushed forward, ignoring the heat through a thin grate. He could see the cargo bay below. Cages lined up like silent tombs, and in the middle, her. The girl sat with her back to the bars, head bowed, looking like nothing had changed. But then, slowly, she tilted her head toward him. Her glowing eyes caught the dim light. He tapped the grate softly. Twice, she shifted just enough for her sleeve to slip back, revealing the small shard of metal he had given her earlier. She held it tightly, understanding what the signal meant. He mouthed the words without sound. "Be ready?" She gave the slightest nod, then returned to stillness. So the watching guards would notice nothing. The human kept moving, following the narrow path toward the main security panel. The walls around him buzzed faintly with the ships. Energy flow in the darkness. Every sound was louder. The groan of the metal frame, the faint hum of the collar devices, the slow footsteps of a distant guard as he turned the last corner. A voice broke the silence. "What are you doing down here?" The human froze. A guard stood at the far end of the shaft, tall and insect-like, holding a lantern that spilled pale light into the cramped space. The guard's black eyes blinked slowly, cooling systems overheating. The human answered calmly, "Captain doesn't want another engine fault." The guard studied him for a moment, then grunted, "Hurry up," and stepped back, disappearing around the corner. The human waited until the footsteps faded before moving again. He reached the security panel, a small locked console built into the wall. Wires snaked out from it like veins. He pulled out the override chip, his hands steady despite the pounding in his chest. The panel clicked open, and he slid the chip inside. A soft beep confirmed it was ready. One command, and the cages would unlock. But timing was everything. The girl needed a few seconds to free herself from the collar. The guards needed to be far enough away, and he needed to be close to the bridge to take control once the chaos began. He crawled back to the grate above her cage. Waiting there in the shadows, he watched as one of the guards walked past, speaking to another in their sharp, clicking language, when they turned the corner. He tapped the grate twice again. Her hands moved fast, slipping the shard into the small slot on the collar. Sparks danced briefly as the device fought against the lock. Her jaw tightened. Eyes focused, then click. The collar hung loose around her neck, and she let it drop silently to the floor. The human's breath caught. That sound, that tiny click, was the beginning of everything. But then, footsteps, heavier this time, coming closer. A guard had returned earlier than expected. The human's muscles tensed. He pulled the shock baton from his pocket, the metal cold in his hand. The guard stepped into view, eyes narrowing at the girl's cage. "What's this?" he hissed, moving closer. His clawed hand reached for the bars. The human didn't think. He dropped from the grate in one smooth motion. Landing behind the guard, the shock baton flashed with blue light as it struck the alien's neck. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. The guard collapsed silently. The girl stared at him, her eyes wide. He met her gaze and whispered, "Stay low. Follow me when I call." Then he dragged the guard's body into the shadows, making sure no one would find it soon. Above them, the ship's red emergency lights began to flicker. The human knew there was no turning back now. Asterisk. The ship's night cycle had just begun, but the human was wide awake. The cargo bay was quieter than it had been in days. Most guards were gone, either in their sleeping pods or patrolling far from the prisoners. The hum of the engines was the Synset. The hum of the engines was the DUs. Modio C's long-lasting color. The Modio C/long-lasting color. The cargo bay was quieter, with Cincy/place when Modio C/Becub. Modio C was with Since. Modio C, well in since. We can sued, to slice a quasi sly bad upsize, by my pay have said. I kisawida bila, with the ends it's away it. Mo I lisit to kakrita sit a kite sip it be it sits we you cas a lit a kick kits it sent I to see you that today keys it it guy gab I this mula made it only sound, deep and steady, like a heartbeat. The girl sat in her cage, no collar now, her head low so no one could see the change. The small metal shard was still hidden in her sleeve, though she no longer needed it. Her eyes kept drifting toward the far shadows where she had last seen the human disappear. She didn't know his name, but she knew his promise. When? I tapped twice. Be ready. In the maintenance deck, the human moved quickly. The stolen override chip was in his hand. The shock baton hung at his belt, ready for use. He could feel the weight of time pressing on him. If anything went wrong now, the whole ship would be alerted, and the prisoners would never see freedom. Again, he reached the security hub, a narrow room filled with glowing screens and humming consoles. The controls for every lock, door, and alarm were here. He inserted the override chip into the main panel. The screen flickered, showing a countdown timer. He had exactly 5 minutes to act before the system reset. The first part of his plan began. He tapped a few commands, and the ship's fire alarm triggered. A sharp siren echoed through the corridors. Red lights spun slowly in the ceiling. The sound was loud enough to wake the sleeping crew. Somewhere down the hallway, alien voices shouted in confusion. Footsteps pounded as guards ran toward the engineering deck. Thinking there was a fire near the engines, this gave him the opening he needed. He slipped out of the hub and moved through the dim corridors toward the cargo bay. The sirens were still screaming, but now they were mixed with the faint sound of prisoners waking. Voices whispering in fear. He reached the bay door and slid inside. The red glow of the alarm lights made the cages look like they were drenched in blood. The guards who normally stood watch were gone. Pulled away by the fake fire, only one remained. A smaller, distracted alien pacing near the far end. The human walked past the first row of cages. Keeping his steps silent, he stopped near hers. Tapped the bars twice, her head lifted, and for the first time, her eyes showed something sharper than hope. Determination. She moved quickly, slipping out of the open collar, her hands gripping the bars. The human crouched and began unlocking the cage with a tool from his pocket. The lock clicked softly and the doors swung open. She stepped out slowly, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. Her bare feet touched the cold floor. She looked at him and whispered, What now? Now we move, he said, but the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway outside. The last guard had returned. The human's hand went to the shock baton, and he pulled it free just as the door slid open. The alien stepped inside, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the open cage. He roared, a high, sharp sound that cut through the sirens. He reached for the blaster at his side. But the human was already moving. The baton crackled with blue light as it struck the guards. Arm, the alien screamed, dropping the weapon. The human followed with a second strike to the chest. The smell of burned skin filled the air, and the guard collapsed to the floor. Go, the human ordered. The girl didn't hesitate. She followed him as he moved toward the exit. Her steps were quiet, but quick. They slipped into the hallway, the red lights flashing across their faces. The sirens were starting to fade. The crew would soon realize there was no fire, and then the real danger would begin. The human took the lead, guiding her through narrow side corridors toward the bridge. Every turn was chosen to avoid main patrol routes, but still, they had to duck into shadow once as two guards rushed past, shouting to each other in their strange clicking language. When they reached a sealed blast door near the bridge, the human stopped. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a signal jammer, and pressed it against the panel. The door hissed open, revealing the heart of the ship's control center. But they weren't alone. At the far side of the bridge stood the captain, a massive reptilian alien with scaled skin and burning yellow eyes. His claws tapped against the hilt of a plasma blade at his side. You think you can take my ship, human? The captain growled, his voice like stone scraping metal. The human stepped forward, keeping himself between the captain and the girl. Not think, he said. No. The captain charged, blade flashing, the human dove aside, the plasma slicing. Through a control console, sparks rained down. The girl grabbed a loose chain from the floor and hurled it at the captain's head. It hit with a sharp clang, making him stumble. The human seized the moment, driving the shock baton into the captain's throat. The alien roared in pain, then fell to his knees, coughing and clutching his neck. One final strike to the side of the head sent him crashing to the floor. Unconscious, the girl stood frozen for a moment, staring at the fallen captain. Is it over? She asked. Not yet, he said. Moving to the main controls, his fingers danced across the glowing keys, sealing every door between the bridge and the cargo bay. The ship was his now. The bridge of the alien transport ship was filled with red light and the sharp smell of burnt metal. Sparks still rained from the damaged console where the captain's plasma blade had struck. The hum of the engines continued steady, but now it carried a strange tension, as if the whole ship could feel the shift in control. The human stood at the main console, fingers moving quickly across alien symbols. His eyes darted between screens, locking doors and rerouting power. Each command brought him closer to full control of the vessel, but time was running out. The rest of the crew would soon realize the alarms were false, and when they came, they would come in force. The girl stood near the door, chains still in. Her hands, her bare feet were silent against the floor. Her eyes kept flicking to the unconscious captain on the ground. His scaled chest rose and fell slowly. He was alive, but for how long, she didn't care. A loud crash came from the other side of the sealed bridge doors. The pounding of heavy boots followed. Voices shouted and the alien tongue filled with anger. The human's jaw tightened. They know we're here, she said quietly. They'll have to break through, he replied, still typing. And by then, we'll be ready. He tapped another command, and the ship's navigation system switched to manual. Now only he could steer. He set a new course, not to the slave market, but toward an uncharted system the route would take. Them far from known patrols, the pounding at the doors grew louder. Metal began to bend under the force. The girl gripped the chain tighter. Her breath quickening, the human moved from the console and took position beside her. He handed her the shock baton. You know how to use it? He asked. She nodded once. Hit until they stop moving. That's the idea. He said with a faint smile. The first dent appeared in the bridge door, then another. Soon the metal glowed hot from plasma torches on the other side. Sparks burst from the edges as the aliens cut through. The human glanced at the girl. Stay behind me until they're close, then strike fast. The door exploded inward with a shower of sparks. And 3 guards stormed in, their insect-like bodies moved with jerky speed, clicking claws raised. The first lunged for the human, swinging a hooked weapon. He ducked under the strike and drove his fist into the alien's midsection, then followed with a knee to the head. The second guard rushed toward the girl. She stepped back, letting him overextend, then jabbed the shock baton into his side. Blue light flashed, and he screamed, collapsing to the floor. The third guard swung a heavy staff, catching the human across the shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he caught the staff with both hands, twisting it until it snapped. Then he slammed the broken end into the alien's chest, knocking him backward into the wall. More shouts echoed from the hallway. The human knew this fight wasn't over. He grabbed the fallen guard's blaster and aimed it at the doorway. The next 2 who tried to enter were met with quick bursts of fire, forcing them to retreat. The girl stayed close, her breathing hard but steady. How many more? She asked. Too many, he answered. We have to move. He crossed back to the console and activated the internal comms. His voice rang through the ship. All prisoners, your cages are open. Find your way to the bridge or to the escape pods. This is your chance in the cargo bay. Mechanical clicks sounded as locks disengaged. Doors swung open and confused. Frightened captives stepped out. Some were too weak to move. Others began running, shouting to each other. The sound of freedom spread like a wave through the ship. The guards outside the bridge were now torn between stopping the human and recapturing the slaves. The noise in the hallway faded as most of them ran toward the cargo bay. This is our moment, the human said, turning to the girl. We get to the helm and keep the ship steady while they escape. He moved the captain's body to the side, sitting in the command chair. The alien controls glowed under his hands. He pushed the ship to higher speed. The stars outside the view window streaked as they jumped into faster travel. The girl stood beside him, still holding the chain. Watching the empty hallway on the screen for the first time, she let herself believe they might make it. But deep in the lower decks, a heavy metal door opened, and the ship's second officer, a massive armored alien with 4 arms, stepped into the corridor. His eyes glowed with cold fury, and in each hand he carried a weapon. The human didn't see him yet, but he felt it. The battle wasn't finished. The bridge was theirs for now, but the hardest fight was still coming. Asterisk, the alien transport ship shook under the force of sudden movement. Metal groaned, lights flickered, and somewhere deep inside, alarms began to wail again. But this time, they were not fake. They were real. The cages had been opened, and chaos was spreading like fire. The human sat in the captain's chair, eyes locked on the screens. His hands moved quickly over the glowing alien controls, sealing off key corridors and blocking guards from regrouping every few seconds. He checked the cargo bay cameras. Each one showed prisoners spilling out of their cages. Some stumbled weakly, barely able to walk after days without food or water. Others grabbed anything they could use as a weapon: broken chains, loose pipes, sharp scraps of metal. The air was filled with shouts in dozens of alien languages, a mix of fear and hope beside him. The girl stood watching the screens, her breath caught as she saw a group of guards rushing toward the bay. There. Going to trap them again, she said. Not if we cut them off, the human replied. His fingers flew across the controls. He slammed the blast doors shut just before the guards reached the prisoners. The heavy metal sealed with a deep clang, locking the enemy out. The girl gripped the chain in her hands tighter. "You're saving them all," she said quietly. "That was the point," he answered. Down in the bay, a tall reptilian prisoner began guiding others toward the escape pods. More joined in, helping the weakest, carrying those who couldn't move. The ship had never felt so alive. Every deck echoed with footsteps, shouts, and the clang of metal against metal. But the humans' eyes narrowed at one screen, the ship's. Second officer, the four-armed, armored alien, was moving fast through the lower corridors. Cutting down anything in his way, his weapons sparked with deadly energy. "He's not letting anyone out alive," the human said under his breath. The girl looked at the screen. Her jaw tightened. "He's coming here. Let him." The human said, "We'll be ready." The bridge door was still damaged from the earlier fight, and the human knew it wouldn't hold for long. He quickly rerouted the ship's navigation to a locked path, straight toward a safe, uncharted system, even if he was thrown off the bridge. The ship would stay on course, on the CUM system. He spoke again, his voice steady. "Everyone, keep moving to the escape pods. Do not stop, do not fight unless you must. The way is clear for now." In the cargo bay, a young alien child clung to her mother's hand. They ran together. Passing the open cage where the girl had been, the mother glanced at it for just a second, as if wondering who had freed it. Then she kept running. The pounding of heavy footsteps drew closer. The second officer's shadow appeared on the hallway screen. 4 glowing eyes locked onto the bridge door, his mouth twisted into a snarl. And all 4 of his arms raised their weapons. The human stood, blaster in one hand, shock baton in the other. He glanced at the girl. "When he comes through, stay low and strike when you can." She nodded, not with fear, but with fierce focus. The door burst open with a roar of tearing metal. The second officer stepped in, towering over both of them. His voice was deep and cold. "You have stolen my ship, human. You will die slowly." The human didn't answer. Instead, he fired the blaster. The energy bolt struck the alien's chest armor and ricocheted off, leaving only a scorch mark. The massive alien laughed, then swung one of his weapons, a glowing axe, at the human's head. The human ducked, the blade passing inches from his face. He rolled aside, coming up behind the alien. The girl darted in, her chain whipping forward. Wrapping around one of the alien's lower arms, she yanked hard, throwing his aim off. He snarled and backhanded her with another arm, sending her skidding. Across the floor, the human's eyes flashed with anger. He drove the shock baton into the alien's back. The blue sparks lit up the bridge, but the alien only staggered. The fight was brutal. Every swing of the alien's weapons sent sparks flying as they hit the walls and consoles. The human moved fast, using his smaller size to dodge and strike. The girl recovered, crawling to the fallen blaster and firing at the alien's unarmored side. This time, he roared in pain. The human seized the moment, kicking the alien's legs out from under him. The huge body hit the floor with a crash. The girl ran forward, chain in hand, and looped it around the alien's throat. The human pressed the shock baton against the chain. Electricity surged through the metal, and the alien went limp. The bridge was silent except for their heavy breathing. The human looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded. Better than him. He returned to the captain's chair. Checking the screens again, most prisoners had reached the escape pods, but many were still aboard. "We hold until the last one is free," Abi said. The girl stood beside him, eyes on the stars rushing past outside the window. For the first time since her capture, she felt no collar, no cage, just the open space ahead. The alien transport ship drifted into the soft light of a distant, uncharted star. Its engines hummed at a steady, calm rhythm now. No alarms, no shouting guards, no rattling cages. The long fight was finally over. The human sat in the captain's chair, the leather worn and cracked beneath his hands. His eyes scanned the screens one last time. All escape pods had launched, carrying freed captives toward the surface of the green-blue planet below. The ship's course was locked in orbit, safe from patrols or enemy ships. Beside him, the girl stood barefoot, her chain still wrapped around her hand, though she no longer needed it. She looked at the planet on the screen. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "It's beautiful. It's safe," he replied. "That's what matters." On one of the smaller screens, the last few prisoners made their way to the pods. The human watched them step inside, the door sealing with a hiss. Moments later, the pods shot away like silver sparks, disappearing toward the surface. The girl stepped closer to the window, her glowing eyes reflecting the distant sunlight. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I did," he answered simply. Silence filled the bridge for a moment, the kind of silence that felt heavy but peaceful. The human leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of everything they had survived sink in. His shoulders still ached from the blow he had taken in the bridge fight. His arms burned with exhaustion, but he didn't care. When the final pod launched, he released a slow breath. "That's it," he said. "They're all free, all of us," she corrected. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only something warmer. He rose from the chair and walked to the side console. Entering the last sequence, the ship's engine slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed felt like the first real peace in years. "You could take this ship anywhere," she said. "You could sell it, hide it, or run." He shook his head. "It's not mine to sell, it's theirs. This ship belongs to the ones who were chained in it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then what happens to you?" He looked out at the planet. "I'll land her on the surface, give the ship to the people, and then maybe find another cage to break." They walked together to the lift that led to the docking bay. The doors opened to the wide platform where the last empty escape pod waited. The air was warmer here, carrying the faint scent of oil and metal. She hesitated at the pod's open door. "You're coming with me, right?" He gave her a small smile. "Of course, but there's something I need to do first." They walked back to the bridge. He crossed to the main console and pressed a series of keys. A low mechanical sound filled the air as every remaining collar, chain, and shackle on the ship detached and clattered to the floor. Even the empty cages swung open. He wanted the ship to die free, just like its passengers. The girl picked up one of the fallen collars, holding it for a moment before dropping it with a metallic clang. "No one will ever wear these again," she said. "Not if I can help it," he answered. When they returned to the docking bay, she stepped into the pod first, turning to watch him. The human paused for just a second, looking back at the long, dim corridors of the ship, remembering every shadow, every locked door, every set of eyes that had watched him in silence. He stepped inside, the door closing with a hiss. The pod shook as it released from the docking clamp. Then it shot forward, leaving the ship behind. The planet grew larger in the window. Blue oceans, green forests, golden plains. They landed in a wide field, tall grass swaying in the breeze. The air smelled of fresh rain and sunlight. Freed captives were already gathering, some looking to the sky, some hugging each other, others just standing still, breathing free air for the first time in years. The humans stepped out of the pod, the girl following. A small crowd turned toward them. The reptilian prisoner who had led others to the pods stepped forward. "You're the one who freed us," he said, his deep voice carrying across the field. The girl's voice rose before the human could speak. "He's our captain now," she said. Her words were clear, and the crowd began to murmur in agreement. Faces from a dozen worlds looked at him, waiting, trusting. He didn't call himself a captain, but he didn't deny it either. He simply nodded and said, "Then we start building something here, together," as the sun broke through the clouds. The girl walked beside him toward the heart of the growing settlement. Her bare feet brushed through the grass, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. She was no longer the prisoner in the cage, and he was no longer just a stranger on a ship. They walked on, leaving the shadows of the past behind. The sound of the ship's engines was gone, replaced by the wind, the voices of the free, and the promise of a new life ahead.